I'll kind of bring in a topic that's pretty popular today, which is over the last few weeks, it's a fairly well-known letter that many firms have written to Autodesk complaining about software development and how the tools have been developing slowly compared to how the cost has been rising. Now, the reason why I mention that is that what they're complaining about isn't just the cost, it's the fact that the tools aren't specific enough to what it is that they do. Now, what's important about that is that think about all the different industry professionals that we have. May they be structural engineers, mechanical engineers, the architects, the interior designers, which kind of fall into the architecture, but they do some other things. And I could keep on going. They each need tools that enable them to be able to do what they do best. It's very difficult to put all those different things into just one piece of software. Since it's difficult to put every tool that they need into one piece of software, or maybe they work on a variety of different kinds of project types. A person that's a civil engineer might work on bridges, or they may work on the actual land, or they may be doing highways. Each one of these is taking some slightly different tools, but you can draw information from all those different things. So what I believe in is that the tools should be able to share information. So you give the individual the right tool, then pull the correct information out of that tool. And then once you have the right information, then you can ideally bring them to a point where somebody else who needs that information can now grab that information and either bring it into their own software or view it in something like Power BI, which would allow them to read the information from multiple different databases and get a better big picture of what everybody else has been doing.
Yeah, but this is something a little bit more advanced. I don't think every design office is using Power BI. Even if they use Revit, I'm afraid it's not very popular. Even there are definitely maybe most of the bigger companies, but the biggest part of them are not using this. And what do you do then?
Well, it's interesting, and I don't know if these numbers are still accurate or not because it's been several years since I've read them. But at one point I read that there was something along the lines of maybe it was 50, 60% of all architects that were practicing were just sole practitioners. But then you had the large firms. The large firms only had maybe 30% of the architects, but they were doing something along the lines of 70% of the projects because they have so many of them that they can handle the larger projects, the bigger projects. So even though there are a lot of people that candidly can't afford the software or work for small firms, it's amazing how many large firms are actually doing this. So I could argue that a lot of the projects that are going out today, particularly larger projects, actually are using these tools. Now, they're not all using the same tools, but they are using a lot more of the tools than what oftentimes the industry thinks that they are. So that puts the smaller practitioner in an interesting position, because how do you compete with these bigger firms that can afford the tools? And I think that the real answer is that you each go, just like you always have in the past, you go for the kinds of jobs that you specialize in, and then you use the right tools for the jobs that you specialize in. Would it be nice if people that couldn't afford those tools or weren't in big enough firms to be able to have those tools? Yes, it would be nice if they did. But if you can't, you make do with the processes that you can. You charge the fee that you need in order to be able to make a profit. And you continue to build those customer relationships and continue to bring in work. I think that there's actually right now, there's a big gap between the smaller firms and the larger firms and their capabilities just due to what resources that they have available. And as a result of that, I almost think that the clients kind of need to pick which type of firm, which individuals make sense for their projects and what it is that they need based off the deliverables that they can get.
I understand. But weren't these companies complaining about this? Weren't these big companies? There are all big companies, right?
They're not all big companies, but they
Most
tend
of
to
them.
be. Yeah.
Most of them, right? I don't try to put you in a bad position here, but you say they don't have good enough arguments for this, for what they claim.
Good enough arguments. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I mean, like their request is founded or not, like, or they just need to look for to learn to use other tools that are complementary to Revit.
I think that they need to use whatever tool is right for them in order to be able to be competitive in the marketplace.
Yeah. So, but regarding the price, they said as well that the features and the performance of the software has not raised so much as the price, right? So maybe the complaint was regarding this. Yeah. You are not the CEO of Autodesk. You cannot know about this.
Well, the truth of the matter is that I've followed Autodesk for well over 20 years. I actually first started using AutoCAD. I learned AutoCAD back in 1989. Back then, there wasn't the internet. I learned everything through Catalyst or Cadence magazines, because those were the only two magazines that were distributed every month, and you could read through them to find articles on the latest software. And I would learn what it was that companies like Autodesk were doing. And over the years, Autodesk actually, they started off by pricing their software rather low. And that's how they were able to first start to get individuals to start purchasing their software. And forgive me if this conversation goes really long, but because I have a long story with this. Okay. Then as time went on, they realized that they weren't really going to get any bigger by continuously just pushing AutoCAD as what they called their flagship product. So they decided to start to add more tools. And when they started doing that, they made products like Land Desktop, they made Architectural Desktop, Mechanical Desktop, and they called these desktops because they sat on top of AutoCAD and they worked with the AutoCAD environment. Over time, they started to develop other software such as Inventor or Civil 3D. Now I believe they actually purchased the product that eventually came Civil 3D, but they ended up bringing that in. Revit's the same way. They actually purchased Revit and then brought that in. And this was all taking place somewhere around 2001, 2002. And they went from a company whose net worth was closing in on $1 billion to a point where they were a company that was somewhere in the $2 to $3 billion US dollar range. So 2-3 times more revenue at that point. Then they started to change their licensing model. And when they changed their licensing model, people started to need to buy their suites of packages. So they got in all those different software programs combined into one box. And people just had to buy that one box of software for the most part. At this point, talking BIM, ArchiCAD was probably the most popular architectural, unless you wanted to say Vectorworks, but let's say ArchiCAD was probably the most popular BIM software at that time. So when they wanted everybody to get Revit, people wanted to stay on architectural desktop, because for the previous 2 or 3 years, they were all architectural desktop users if you were in the architecture industry. Then Autodesk also during this time period put out their engineering software, which was AutoCAD MEP, and eventually they changed the names of their softwares. But anyway, what happened is that they then took Revit and they bundled it with architectural desktop. So everybody got Revit in the early days for free, because they already were purchasing architectural desktop, getting those updates on a regular basis. So everybody was getting Revit, and then they were just putting it on their shelves. So when it came time for them to switch over to a true BIM environment, though Autodesk used to argue that architectural desktop was a true BIM environment, which is now AutoCAD Architecture after they renamed it, they then changed their marketing so that Revit was their BIM software, and AutoCAD Architecture was a way to sort of streamline the architectural process by adding windows, doors, walls, those sorts of things, standard detail components. And I will go back to answering your question. And then as time went on, because they were Autodesk and everybody had AutoCAD or AutoCAD Architecture, people just started to adopt Revit. And that's one of the reasons why, particularly in the United States, but even worldwide, it's spread. Revit became such a market dominant force. Now, if we go back to the pricing structure, what all that means is that they've put a lot of development in either purchasing other companies or in developing their online software offerings, and they need to make that money back from somewhere. Because no matter what people think, Autodesk doesn't just make money like this. They actually can lose money in certain divisions, and they have in the past lost money in certain divisions. So they have budgets for each one of their divisions. And what they're doing right now is that they're trying to add more and more to their online offerings that interface with products like Revit or Navisworks or even AutoCAD. And now they are trying to make these online file sharing options, which is basically BIM 360 now, where you can share files between offices, with the contractors, with clients, whatever the case may be. And the argument is that not enough companies, not enough firms are using these tools, which means that the value that they're getting with the huge price increases, it doesn't match up. Now, I'm not arguing that the price increases aren't probably a little too much. They probably are, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. But the fact that the larger firms, the ones that are doing these big projects, are starting to adopt these tools. They are starting to bring them in because they're purchasing them anyway. And as a result of that, even though many of the smaller firms don't necessarily see it, a lot of the larger firms are using them. The larger firms that aren't using them, and in some cases they were some of those that were part of that letter to Autodesk, all that means is that they're not really using those tools in their day-to-day practices. An argument can be made that eventually they're going to have to use those tools. So the question becomes, are they going to continue to pay the price that Autodesk demands, Or are they going to move to a different software that's maybe a little bit less expensive that can produce very similar results, and they can still share with their clients? Now, I think what the Autodesk way of looking at this situation is that Autodesk is willing to actually lose a certain percentage of their customers because they already have such a big market base anyway, that by increasing their software costs, or the amount of money from the subscriptions or programs, that it will offset the losses in their customer base. And then at that point, if that ever switches over, where they lose so many customers that it no longer makes up for that increase in cost, then you're going to see them have to restructure the way that their business model actually is, whether that means dropping the price of the software, giving the tools to those design firms that they want to see so they're willing to pay the more money, or whatever the case may be. But the reason why I said the entire long story is this shouldn't be a shock to anybody. I read in the original article that when it got published, I can't remember the one who originally did it, but they made it sound like this is new breaking news. I'm thinking to myself, no, 20 years ago, people were complaining the software cost too much and it wasn't getting developed enough. But look at where it was 20 years ago and look at where it is today. Look at the features that weren't being used 20 years ago that are being used today. Imagine where this is going to be 10 years from now, 15 years from now. People are going to be using those features and they're going to be complaining the software costs too much now. And basically, it's going to be the exact same complaints by the time I'm ready to retire in 25, 30 years, whatever it ends up being, as what I heard 25, 30 years ago, because people never want to pay X amount of dollars for software. And now the argument is that we legitimately can't afford it. And I understand that. But at that point, you just need to decide, can your business model support purchasing this software, or do I need to go with another solution in order to stay in business? It's really no different than if you're a construction company and do you buy a better piece of hardware that can do something more efficiently, or if you can't afford it, do you go with the old hammer and nails approach? Either way you can get the job done, but you have to do what it is that you can afford and still stay in business.
I understand, but this brings more challenges. If you are going to migrate to other solutions, first and foremost, Autodesk is the biggest and has maybe the best and most developed software as well. There is a reason why the most of us are using it, right?
Right.
Second, the talent pool using these products, it's immense. There are a lot of people, right? If you switch to a new software, then you need to retrain people to learn the new software. And then if someone leaves, you need to find people with that specific talent, or you will need to retrain that. So either way, Autodesk, they know in what privileged position they are. And I think they just push it as far as they can until someone will complain, right? So if nobody's saying anything, they're just pushing. And definitely many others will think about other reasons why it might be difficult to go to somewhere else.
Yeah, that is exactly right. And there is no easy solution to this. If someone is really bragging about Autodesk, I can kind of counter the point. If somebody is really saying, I don't like the way that Autodesk does business, I can usually counter the point. So I can argue this both ways. But the way that I usually say it is, imagine if you're an architecture and engineering firm and your client came to you and said, you know what? And if all you were making was just enough to be able to get by. And your client came to you and said, the guy down the street, they're giving me so much more, even though they're not. And they're charging me 35% less. Can you drop your price? Your response to that would probably be, well, let me think about this at first. And then once you realize that you were going to be losing money, you would probably say, well, we can't do that, but these are the benefits that we can provide to you. This is what makes us unique. We understand your business. We provide things the way that you're used to having them. We provide the data in a way that you can use it. That's the reason why we're worth spending the extra money. Or you would figure out some other way. Our designs are so much more robust and nice. That's the reason why people come to you, or whatever the case may be. Well, people don't think about that about Autodesk, but I could say the exact same thing about how Autodesk prices their things and markets their software and in that sort of thing. There is a point where you'll realize that all they are is a business. And what I usually like to do is step back, take a deep breath when someone complains about the whole pricing structure and the way things are. And then I say, this is the reason why they're doing it. I understand if you don't like it. I understand if you can't afford it. And that's perfectly fine. So what other options do you have? And then you can break down what those other options are, and then you can adopt those other options. That's what we do as an industry. Exactly. We're architects, we're engineers. What do? Well, if there's a solution that's going to work every time, but it costs twice as much, do we adopt that solution? Maybe, but more than likely, and I'm talking products or whatever goes into a building, the real answer is that we'll probably go, well, isn't there a cheaper way that we can do this, a better way that we can do this, a better way that it can fit into our budget? And it's our job to make it work and find what the actual best solution is for this project for our clients. And too often we don't do that with our own staff. And that really leads to another half of this conversation, which is too often we do a very poor job as an industry as a whole on training our staff or providing them with the ability to grow, to adopt new technology, or to even learn more within their own industry. Now, we may have lunch and learns where people come in, and present about their product, or we talk about what we did on a certain project. Why aren't we doing that with the software? Why aren't we training the employees on that? It comes down. Now, the argument that I hear is that we don't have enough money to be able to do that. Okay, if you don't have enough money to be able to do that, I can understand. But then are you putting that, are you just going to continue to fall behind? Or are you going to start to actually budget for this? Maybe this is like a benefit to your employees. Are you going to demand that your employees start to learn on their own? Maybe tie that into their annual review so that, they've, during the course of a year, they've improved an XYZ number of softwares. And then once they have done that, then they can get the bigger raise that they deserve because they've been going through that course of self-improvement. What is the way of being able to get this education to the individuals? Now, my own job is supporting a lot of different things, but I also support the Revit users in our office. I haven't done production Revit work in probably 7 years. Production Revit work. Done a lot of Revit work. But I still know more than virtually every single individual in my own office when it comes to using the Revit software. Why? Because everybody focuses on the stuff that they use each and every day, and for good reason. But they have a tendency, because they're not demanded to expand their expertise, to learn what all those new features actually are. And because they don't have to learn the new things, or maybe there's not enough money in the budget for those to learn those new things, you then get letters like got put out to Autodesk saying we never use these new features. Well, it's because you're not empowering your employees to actually be able to leverage the newer technologies. It's going to enable them to be able to use these technologies, which can then start to justify the actual cost, because then you can start to have more energy efficient buildings, or you can start to produce your projects faster and reduce hours, be able to do clash detections that will save the project money. You start to understand that there is it's not just a software problem. It's actually, in my own opinion, it's a problem in how the industry deals with educating their employees and upgrading what it is that they can do and providing the services that they can provide. Right now, there's only a handful of people out there that are really good at making suggestions on what new services that we as architecture or engineering firms can provide. To this day, most of the firms still do the same things that they were doing 100 years ago, just instead of doing it with a pen or a pencil and paper, they're now doing it in AutoCAD, or they're doing it in Revit or ArchiCAD or whatever the software is.
Yeah. You know, there is other challenge as well. Before, like for 10 years or maybe 15 years ago, it was a little bit easier software wise, right? Because if you knew how to use a product, then you did only that every day, right?
Right.
We got to a point where you really need to know a suite of softwares. You cannot know only one, and this is a challenge in itself as well, especially for people that are not very willing to learn new things, because there are people. A few years back, I had this mindset. I was not looking. I just wanted to do my job in the best way possible with what I knew, but I was not looking forward to learn new things. Of course, I grow up meanwhile, but I'm thinking like I'm definitely not the only one. I was not the only one. There are definitely people that are thinking the same way still, and this is a challenge in itself, right? And cost wise as well, because it's not only a software. You need to do your job, and it will cost you more, and in this way it's going to be more difficult to switch as well, because this is another genius evil strategy from Autodesk, because they have so many products, right? To achieve a product, like you start using InfraWorks to quickly design a bridge or a road, right? And after that you use CivilWorks, and maybe you put it in Revit, and you need all this. If you go from here, where do you go? You need to start to learn again 3, 4, 5 softwares to do that. So this overcomplicates things as well.
The real point there is, though, is that 30%, 40%, however much extra that it costs, which compared to the cost of an employee isn't substantial usually, is that what's prohibitive? Or is it the fact that you're not charging enough to be able to, because you're competing with 7 other firms which are also dropping their prices just to get that work in order to be able to afford it? So I'm not saying that Autodesk or any of the software aren't playing a part in it. I'm saying that it's a bigger problem in the in the way that we're doing our fee structures and everything else, because candidly, we're not necessarily charging enough in many cases for all the new technology, the new tools, the training, because we're trying to just win the work as opposed to necessarily have the latest and greatest technology, which potentially could reduce risk, make the design more efficient, and give an overall better product as an end result if used correctly for the project. And in some cases, in many cases, most cases maybe, the client isn't demanding it. So if the client isn't demanding it, then why should we do it?
Yeah.
But what's interesting, particularly for the larger firms, is that more and more we are seeing the client demanding it, which is one of the reasons why the investment is getting put in there, because otherwise, the larger firms typically need the larger projects, and the clients that are demanding it are usually for the larger projects, particularly if they're going to be managing the facility or whatever. And because of that, we have to buy a lot of the latest and greatest technologies, not just to stay competitive with the people down the street, but just to get our projects done. So it becomes an investment for us.
Yeah. We can get back to talking a little bit about what the customers are asking for, what they require a little bit after. Because we started this conversation about Autodesk, I have two more points about this, and one is this. I work with Autodesk products from 2009, so it's over 10 years now, and I worked with Tekla structures as well. What I've seen during the years, I have only some. I admire. We have some competition, Trimble, Nemetschek, and other Bentley as well. I never worked with Bentley, unfortunately. But from my point of view, during these years, I've just seen like Autodesk getting bigger, stronger, wealthier, and the gap between them grows and grows and grows, and this cannot be good for anybody except Autodesk, of course.
It's not good, but the question is and I'll actually ask you this question: why is Autodesk getting bigger?
Well, to start from, they had, like you said, they had this strategy to acquire a lot of customers in the start. They were very smart how they promoted their software. They were like, it was like you had Autodesk software, AutoCAD in every university and all over the place. They were smarter about this, of course. Something else, what they did, they bought a lot of companies like Revit, Navisworks, Forge, and many others. Even Maya, I think they bought it. They bought lots of softwares, right? I don't know how to precisely answer to your question, but this is what I see from my.
Yeah, and they absolutely did that. But what's interesting is that people keep looking at Autodesk profits, and they think, obviously, Autodesk keeps getting bigger. They start looking out there at the employees that are available, and they think, obviously, Autodesk is getting bigger. But the truth is that if you look industry-wide and you look at all the different software products that are out there today, Autodesk is actually losing market share. The thing is that there's just so many people out there that have training in Autodesk software and other software that there's a bit of an illusion that they're getting bigger. But the truth is, oddly enough, they actually aren't. Yes, they're making more money, but they no longer dominate the market quite as much as they used to, because you do have other softwares that are now available and are absolutely vital to the workflows. In my own office, honestly, it's true that many of our architects and engineers spend a lot of time inside of Revit. Absolutely, they do. But a lot of them also spend time inside of their analysis softwares. Most of the time, analysis software is a different company from Autodesk. I know that I do a lot of rendering, or the people in my company do a lot of rendering, or there's a lot of conceptual design. It's true that we do some conceptual design inside of Revit, and we've gotten quite good at it. But we're also using SketchUp a lot. We're using a variety of other products a lot. And you start to realize that as we diversify in the software that we're starting to use, that actually Autodesk doesn't have as much control as what you probably think that they do. The reality of it is that what do they have control of? The thing that they probably have the most control of out of everything is the stuff that you use to do your construction documentation.
Exactly.
And I mean, that's the big thing. It's not that they're dominating the industry as big as I think that some people think that they are. It's just that most of us use them for our construction documentation. So the question is could we get away from using Autodesk and use something else? And the answer is absolutely. There's a lot of different software out there that would allow us to do three-dimensional BIM models very, very well. There are lots of programs out there that can replace AutoCAD. There are lots of programs out there that would allow us to do those things. But the industry as a whole looks at it and goes, okay, who is it that I can hire so I don't have to train them on something else? And the answer is, well, everybody knows an Autodesk software product, so they hire those people so that they don't have to train them on something else. And do I blame Autodesk for that? Oddly enough, I actually don't blame Autodesk for that, even though their business strategy has been quite successful in allowing that to occur. It's really our business models and how we approach our business is what's caused these conditions.
Yeah, when you put it that way, it makes perfectly sense. Yeah, it makes sense. It just makes sense.
That doesn't mean that there's an easy answer to it. It just means that that's how we got to where we are today.